Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about something called parallel lines cut by a transversal. So this is a special kind of diagram where there are all different relationships between the angles in this diagram. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is what exactly makes up this diagram. So parallel lines is something that we've already talked about. It means that there are two lines that are never going to intersect because they are the same distance apart. So in the diagram that you see here, the parallel lines that I'm referring to are line R and line S. So you can see those are running horizontally through your diagram here. The line T that you see, this is considered a transversal. Okay, so a transversal really is just a line that is going through the two parallel lines. So it's actually intersecting the parallel lines. So the reason why this diagram, this type of diagram is so important is because all of the angles that you see here are connected in some way. Okay, so I want to point out that in a diagram like this, all of the acute angles that you see, so for example, angle 1, angle 3, angle 5, and angle 7, those are all acute angles, and because of that, they're actually all the same exact angle measure. Okay, so if I tell you angle 1 is 50 degrees, you automatically know that angle 3, angle 5, and angle 7 are also 50 degrees. Okay. Similarly, all of the obtuse angles in this diagram are congruent. So angle 2, angle 4, angle 6, and angle 8, those would all be the same exact measure. So going back to what I said, if I know angle 1 is 50 degrees, angle 2 would be 130 degrees. And so angle 2 is 130, 4, 6, and 8. Those are all 130 degrees. So you may be wondering, how did I know it was 130 degrees? Well, the other relationship that we see in this diagram is that any angles that are adjacent to one another, adjacent meaning next to, those angles are supplementary because they form a straight line. So for example, if I look at angles 1 and 2, I can see that those two angles, when I put them together, form a straight angle or a straight line. And so I know that those two angles, when I add them up, have to be 180 degrees. So when I had mentioned that angle 1 maybe is 50 degrees, angle 2 is 130 degrees because when I add them, I get 180 degrees. Okay, so those are just a few of the relationships that you will find in a diagram like this, but we're going to talk more specifically about the names of other relationships in the picture. So what we're going to do is in the blanks below, we're going to state on the first blank whether the angles that I've listed are congruent or supplementary. So remember, congruent means that they're the exact same measure. Supplementary means they're not, and they add up to be 180. And then we're going to say because they are, and we're going to name the specific name given to those angles. Okay? One thing I will mention is that anytime you are asked the relationship between an acute angle and an obtuse angle in this diagram, it's always that they are supplementary. Okay, there is no other relationship between an acute and obtuse angle in this diagram besides the fact that they're supplementary. Okay, all right, so let's take a look at what we have here. So angle 1 and angle 3. If I look at my diagram, angle 1 and angle 3, these angles are actually something we've already talked about. So if you remember, because they are across from each other, okay, and then I just talked about how they're both acute, that means that they are going to be congruent. So the measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 3 are congruent because they are, the special name we give to them, are vertical angles. Okay, so we've talked about that relationship before, and it still applies in a diagram like this. Okay, how about the measure of angle 2 and the measure of angle 3? so looking at your diagram, you can see that the measure of angle 2 is obtuse, and the measure of angle 3 is acute. So as soon as you see that they are not both acute or not both obtuse, they cannot be congruent. So we're going to say that these are not, or we could say non-congruent. I would rather say not congruent. Because they are, and the only name we can give them when this happens, when they're not congruent, is that they are supplementary. Okay, they're going to add up to be 180 degrees. Okay, so now I want you to look at angle 1 and angle 7. So just by looking at them, I'm hoping you can see that they're both acute. Okay, so automatically that means that they're going to be congruent because of the characteristics of this picture. Now, this is going to be a new word for you, a new vocabulary term. So I want you to look at the placement of these angles, okay? The first thing I want you to notice is that they are on opposite sides of the transversal. So remember how I said line T is considered to be the transversal? Angle 1 is to the left of that line, and angle 7 is to the right of that line. So when you see that, we say that they are alternate. That's the first part of our term. And the second thing I want you to see is that those two angles, 1 and 7, are outside of the parallel lines. Okay, so if you look at the parallel lines, you can see 1 and 7 are outside. So we call that being exterior. So these are alternate exterior angles. Okay. All right, let's look at 2 and 6. Now I'm not going to keep scrolling up to the diagram because you guys have this in front of you. If you don't have it in front of you, I would suggest drawing it off to the side just so that you don't have to get dizzy by me moving my screen up and down. Okay, so angles 2 and 6. So if we all look at 2 and 6, I'm hoping that you can see that those are both obtuse angles. Okay, and so again, as soon as we realize that they are both obtuse, we can say that they are congruent. And then because they are, so here's a new vocab word for you. So I want you to look at the angles as if they're in clusters of 4. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4 is a cluster, 5, 6, 7, 8 is a cluster. And I want you to see that angle 2 and angle 6 are both in the top right part, I'll say, of their cluster. Okay, so they're in the same position in each of their little groups. When that happens, we say that they are corresponding angles. Okay, so corresponding angles again means they are in the same position in their little group of 4. So 2 and 6 are in the top right. Okay, 3 and 5. So again, just looking at the size of them, you can see hopefully that they are both acute, and so that means that they are congruent. All right, now let's look at their placement. So I want you to notice that angles 3 and 5 are on opposite sides of that transversal again. Okay, so the transversal that cuts through the two parallel lines, they're on opposite sides. So again, we call that alternate. And the other thing I want you to notice is that they are inside the parallel lines. Okay, so last time we had something with alternate, they were outside the parallel lines. 1 and 7, remember that? And we called that exterior. Well, 3 and 5 are inside the parallel lines, so we call that interior. So these are alternate interior angles. Okay, 1 and 8. So let's look at 1 and 8. 1 is definitely an acute angle, and 8 is an obtuse angle. So whenever you have angles that are opposites, meaning one's acute, one's obtuse, they cannot be congruent. Okay, these are not congruent. It's impossible for an acute angle and an obtuse angle to be congruent. And so the reason that is because they are going to add up to be 180 degrees, which means they are supplementary. Okay, so that should kind of be the easy one for you, because as soon as you notice that they're not both obtuse or not both acute, they're automatically supplementary. No special name given to them besides that. Okay, one more, 6 and 8. So 6 and 8, we can see they are both obtuse, which means they are congruent. And then we've actually already done one like this. So they're across from each other, and what that means is they are vertical angles. Okay, so a lot of new vocab words, but I'm hoping that maybe some of the things I said will help you remember which is which. So let's do some practices with this. Let's turn the page. And so we are looking at this new diagram, okay, and it says in the figure below, lines P and Q are parallel. So they tell you that because it's actually important that you know they're parallel. If they weren't parallel, these angle relationships would not exist. Okay, so it's a very specific type of picture that this works for. And so it says for number 1, if the measure of angle 3 is 126 degrees, the measure of angle 8 is. Okay, so on the picture, I'm actually going to write in right here. The measure of angle 3 is 126 degrees. And they're asking about the measure of angle 8, so this angle down here. So before even looking at the choices, what I would do is think, are these two angles congruent? And hopefully you can see that they're not, because angle 3 is obtuse, right? And angle 8 is acute. So automatically we can see, okay, they are not the same measure. So what you're going to do is you're going to cross off any choices that show that angle 8 is 126 degrees, because it's not. Okay, so once we've kind of narrowed that down, we can say, all right, well, I know that any obtuse angle with any acute angle automatically means that they're supplementary, and supplementary means they add to 180. So I'm just going to make sure, is 180 minus 126 54? Yes, it is. So B and C are my choices that I'm going to figure out. And so the choices are 54 because they are alternate exterior angles, or because they are supplementary. Well, they can't be alternate exterior because that means they'd be equal, okay? And by the way, angle 3 is not exterior anyways. It would have to be something like angles 1 and 8. Those are alternate exterior. So B is out, and the answer has to be C. All right, now number 2 says, if the measure of angle 4 is 80 degrees, the measure of angle 5 is... I'm actually going to go back up here and I'm going to erase what I have in my diagram. So now they're saying, assume the measure of angle 4 is 80 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to write that in. And the measure of angle 5 right here is what they're asking us about. Okay, so looking at those two angles, they're both acute, which means they're congruent. And so angle 5 is going to be 80 degrees. So we can eliminate choices A and C. And why is it 80 degrees? Is it because they're alternate interior angles, or is it because they're corresponding? So looking at your picture here, 4 and 5, they are on opposite sides of my transversal, and they are inside the parallel lines. So they are alternate interior. Corresponding would be something like angles 4 and 8, okay, or angles 1 and 5. So that is not correct. Choice B is our answer there. All right, let's turn the page. So we're using the same diagram. I am actually going to redraw it over here so I'm not flipping back and forth. So let's see. This was 1, 2. Okay, and you're welcome to use my diagram here. So you don't have to flip back and forth if you want. Okay, so they're saying the measure of angle 1 is 34 degrees, and the measure of angle 4 is, okay, so these angles are both acute. Okay, so I know that it can't be choice D because those are congruent. And looking at where the angles are placed, they are across from each other. And so that means that they're vertical. Okay, so just going through the choices here. Alternate exterior, that would be if they were asking about angles 1 and 8. Corresponding would be if they were asking about angles 1 and 5. Okay, so those are not our answers. And we're going to go with choice B. All right, number 4, let's do this again. Diagram. Okay, so now they're saying the measure of angle 2 is 135 degrees. What is the measure of angle 6? Okay, so I am looking at those two angles and thinking, all right, they're both obtuse, so they have to be congruent, so choice D is out. And why are they congruent? Well, they are both in the top right of their little group of 4, meaning they're in the same position, and that means that they're corresponding. Okay, so alternate exterior would be something like angles 2 and 7, so that's out. Alternate interior would be something like 3 and 6, so that's out. And so they are corresponding, same position in their little group of 4. All right, guys, last one here. We are going to use the picture below to answer the questions that follow. All right, so here's a new picture for us. Part A says, label angle 2 as A. Okay. Label angle 2's corresponding angle B. Okay, so corresponding angle, again, means it's in the same position in its little group of 4. Okay, so angle 6 is the same as angle A because they're both in that top right of their group of 4. So that's going to be angle B. Label angle 2's alternate exterior angle, angle C. Okay, so alternate exterior means it's on the opposite side of the transversal and it's outside the parallel lines. So angle 8 is going to be labeled C. Label angle 2's vertical angle D. Okay, so vertical angles mean they are across from each other and they are congruent. So angle D is going to be where angle 4 is. Okay, if angle 2 is 110 degrees, I'm going to label that here, 110, find each of the following. What is the measure of angle 8? Okay, well, angle 8 and angle 2 are alternate exterior angles, which I know means that they are congruent. Okay, they're both obtuse, and so that is also 110 degrees. Angle 6 is a corresponding angle with angle A, and so, or with angle 2. So that again means that they are congruent. They're both obtuse. So it's 110 degrees. The measure of angle 1, okay, so this is right next to angle 2, which means they are adjacent, which means they are not the same size. Angle 2 is obtuse and angle 1 is acute. And so my only option when they are different is that they're supplementary, which means they have to add to 180 degrees. So if I know angle 2 is 110 degrees, angle 1 has to be 70 degrees so that they both add to 180.